Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us here virtually for this important hearing on road spreading. It's a practice in Pennsylvania that is very toxic and dangerous, and I'm grateful that Senator Comita is partnering with me on this hearing. I'm State Senator Katie Muth, the chair of the Senate Democratic Policy Committee representing Senate District 44, which is parts of Berks, Chester, and Montgomery counties. And as I mentioned, I'm here with the chair of the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee for the Democrats in the Senate, Senator Comita, who also represents Chester County. And today's hearing will feature a discussion on the issues and impacts associated with the practice of spreading wastewater from the oil and gas industry on Pennsylvania roads from a public health, environmental, and regulatory perspective. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection declared a moratorium on spraying produced water from conventional wells onto roadways in Pennsylvania in 2018. However, despite that moratorium, reports indicate the companies disposed of over 2 million gallons of toxic radioactive drilling wastewater on Pennsylvania roads between 2018 and the end of 2020. And this is still going on today. Actually, Senator Comita and I last fall made a trip to Dimock, Pennsylvania, and Susquehanna County for a tour of some of the newer well pads being drilled, and we literally were standing on the side of the road looking at a new frac pad, and a street sweeper left a well pad site and drove right by us on a paved road and did not sweep the street, but rather dumped liquid on the road. And I still remember that moment and looking at you and sort of in disbelief, but it was right there in plain daylight. We know that there's studies on this showing the harm. So we're grateful to have experts here today to discuss that and how this is still allowed. And I will turn it over to Senator Comita for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Senator Muth. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Thanks so much to our testifiers today for sharing your expertise with us, and of course to all of our attendees for joining us virtually today. I'm State Senator Carolyn Comita. I represent the 19th District here in Chester County. And as Senator Muth mentioned, I also serve as the Minority Chair for the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee in the Senate. When I first learned that untreated drilling wastewater, including chemical contaminants, heavy metals, and even radioactive material, was being dumped onto roadways in Pennsylvania, I was shocked. And I think most people would be shocked. But this is indeed happening. Wastewater from conventional oil and gas wells is being used to de-ice pavement and is being used as a, quote, dust suppressant along unpaved roadways. What I have learned, and what I believe we are going to hear more about today, this practice can be harmful to human health, can negatively impact our land and water, and has little to no benefit for roadways. That's right. Studies have shown that not only can it negatively impact human and environmental health, but it's not even effective at suppressing dust on unpaved roads. Pennsylvania's Constitution guarantees us the right to clean air and pure water, and the Commonwealth is entrusted to conserve and maintain our natural resources for all of our residents today and always. I look forward to learning more from our experts today on this issue and the policy solutions we can bring to protect these rights and ensure the health and safety of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Comita. And I want to mention that Senator Carney is also joining us online virtually to participate in this hearing, and we'll announce other senators as they jump on. And the format for our hearings goes as followed. So we have a set of panelists to test, or a set of testifiers for each panel, and they complete their 5 to 7 minute verbal testimony. The written testimony provided in advance is in front of us, so we've had it to read over and follow along. After that panel is complete, we will ask questions to that testifier or testifiers and then move on to the next panel. The chat is live, and so we like to see people chatting and commenting and putting their thoughts in there, and it's helpful. We download that later and see what everyone was saying, and we really do appreciate that kind of participation. This is being live streamed at senatormoves.com/policy, and I believe as well on Senator Comita's social media, and a recording of this hearing will be available afterwards for those who couldn't join us live in real time. So we will start with panel number 1, where we are honored to have Dr. William Burgos, the Professor of Environmental Engineering and Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Penn State University, where I got my undergrad. And you are part of panel 1, which is efficacy and safety of road spreading relative to oil and gas wastewater. So thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the senators for the invitation to testify. I'm just going to start with a little background about myself. I've been a professor of environmental engineering at Penn State for almost 29 years now. I grew up in Yardley, Pennsylvania, in Bucks County, so strongly identify as a Pennsylvania resident. And talking with some of my friends from high school and that part of the country, they're not even really all that aware of the volume of gravel roads that are in the state. I believe it's 25,000 miles, which is about 20% of the road inventory. Nor are they aware of maintenance requirements that are needed to keep roads, gravel driveways functional. So I wanted to just start with a little background on, gravel road maintenance. So with respect to summer months, if things get dry and your car is going fast enough, you will see dust behind your vehicle. And so dust suppressants are used to keep this dust down. These dust suppressants, the ones that work, are calcium chloride and magnesium chloride based. And so as the scientist on the panel, I'm sorry to make it a bit of a science lecture, but I just want to point out that calcium and magnesium are divalent cations, which mean they have a +2 charge, which allows them to bridge clay minerals together. And the clays are the finest materials in the roads that tend to get airborne by vehicular traffic. And so by using these divalent chloride-based salts, you can basically knit the clays back into the roadbed. And not only do they serve as dust suppressants, they're sometimes marketed as road stabilizers as well. In the winter season, you would really steer away from ever using rock salt, which is sodium chloride. Sodium is a monovalent cation that will tend to disperse clays and basically lead to destabilization of the road. So if you ever made the bad mistake of heavily salting your gravel driveway and then had some heavy vehicles drive across it, you would quickly run into the problem of rutting and other performance problems of the road. And so typically agencies that own a lot of gravel roads like DCNR or National Forests, they're going to use cinders or sand or gravel for traction. They're not going to try and add a sodium chloride based material to de-ice the roads, because it would just lead to major performance problems with the road itself. The next bit of background I'd like to give you is on the EPA criteria for the beneficial reuse of industrial waste. And there are 2 specific criteria that must be met for a material to be considered in the category of beneficial reuse, beneficial use, co-products. There's varied terms in the regulatory landscape, but we're talking about the same thing as far as taking a waste from one industry and trying to repurpose it for another, which has a lot of, value to it. The criteria are that the material must perform as good as the material it's intended to replace, and the material cannot cause more environmental harm than the material it's trying to replace, right? So these are the two key criteria, and our work's going to show that oil and gas produced waters fail on both of those criteria. So the use of, I don't want to call it a loophole, but the idea of saying that this is a beneficial use application or a co-product designation, applying the federal criteria with respect to how you would classify that product, it doesn't meet the two criteria. So now go into some background on the research that we've done over the years. So starting around 2015 or so, really kicked off more by trying to get an idea of some of the environmental impacts of unconventional oil and gas development, primarily shale gas development in the Marcellus and now the Utica shales. And our research focused on 4 areas: chemical characterizations of oil and gas produced waters and dust suppressants, toxicological characterizations using Daphnia, which is this water flea. It's a common freshwater indicator organism, as well as human receptor gene based assays. So this is, toxic responses to you and I. Third, the evaluation of the efficacy of these products using dust generation experiments. And then fourth, the evaluation of rainfall runoff characteristics using large-scale lab tests where we basically make a small section of a road in the lab, rain on it, and collect all of the runoff and characterize what actually washes off the road. Okay, so major findings. The chemical characteristics of conventional and unconventional oil and gas produced waters overlap considerably with respect to major constituents as well as radium activity. So there's not a whole lot of difference, at least in, when regionally, when we talk about Pennsylvania produced waters, conventional, unconventional, in a mature well, in other words, past the flowback period, et cetera, mature produced water that's being generated, that those things are not dramatically different. In fact, we have to go to elaborate mass spectrometry kind of techniques, isotope geochemistry, to distinguish, to so-called fingerprint one form from the other, because the chemical constituents are all so similar. You have to take it to a different level to try and differentiate them. Okay, number 2, the contaminants of concern include chloride with respect to freshwater salinization and also impacts on infrastructure as far as corrosivity and other sorts of things. So chloride for stream health, and radium and petroleum hydrocarbons primarily for human health. And of course, unfortunately, there's lead, arsenic, and a couple other trace metals that might be of concern. But really, from a risk-based standpoint, radium being a known carcinogen. And these petroleum hydrocarbons in produced waters that have elevated petroleum hydrocarbon concentrations, which might be visible to you and I as an oily sheen, these were the ones that had that direct human receptor cell-based response with respect to potentially causing toxicity, maybe even cancer. Finding number 3, because of the high sodium content, and this is why I wanted to start with that background on the road maintenance side, oil and gas produced waters are not effective dust suppressants. So we can classify brines different ways. We can say, oh, this is a sodium chloride brine, or this is a calcium chloride brine, because the predominant cation is sodium or calcium. They're usually all balanced by chloride with respect to these petroleum-containing formations. And the produced waters in Pennsylvania would actually be categorized as a hybrid, like sodium-calcium chloride brine, because there's so much sodium in it. And sodium, as I said at the beginning, sodium can de-ice. It can reduce the melting point of snow and water so that things melt on the road. But sodium will destabilize clays, and So in all of the laboratory dust generation experiments that we've done, we found that these oil and gas produced waters are not effective dust suppressants, depending on the relative humidity. So we can control this experiment such that we can control the relative humidity in the system that reflects either like a patch of road that's getting direct summer sun as compared to a shaded patch. That in most cases, these oil and gas produced waters are no more effective than rainwater. So in other words, just wetting the road is what you're getting. You're not getting that chemical knitting that the calcium chloride might provide with respect to a longer duration of dust suppression and things like that. Number 4, oil and gas produced waters destabilize roads. So what we saw is that they produce a tremendous amount of dust in the dust generation experiments. But we also did these rainfall runoff experiments, and we measured the solids, which we can think of as a proxy for aggregate or dollars of maintenance materials with respect to putting stuff back on your gravel road. And these things led to a greater loss of solids from the roads during this heavy storm event that we used to simulate this stuff, compared to rainwater being spread onto the test cell at the beginning of the experiment. And then finally, number 5 would be, as a dust suppressant, because of these findings, oil and gas produced waters fail to meet the EPA's criteria for beneficial reuse of industrial waste. And I'll end it there. I'm trying to present things that are, as my friends back in Yardley, they're not environmental engineering professors. They want, an explanation that everybody can understand. And hopefully I've done that. And so I'll just, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Cometa, do you want to start with question Q&A?
Yes, thank you, Senator Muth, and thank you, Dr. Burgos. Very interesting. I've been following your research, reading at least your executive summaries and conclusions and so on to, to get a good sense of what the situation is with the brining. So there are 2 important parts of your research. One is the impacts of the chemicals and the radon and the actual the components of the wastewater on environmental health and on human health. And the second part is, and I believe that this is an important piece of it, that the DEP has a moratorium, but on the spreading of the brine, but if there's a use for it that's deemed effective or useful or whatever, that there's a way to get around the moratorium by saying, hey, I can suppress dust with this brine. Could you talk a little bit more about that piece of it? I understand that the moratorium is in place, the brining is happening anyway. Some of it is probably being done by saying, hey, this is a useful product, and some of it is being done because it's the most expeditious way to get rid of the brine. So could you talk a little bit about what exactly the situation is now, and how you think we better educate, enforce to eliminate this practice?
Yeah, okay. So it's a bit more of a policy question as compared to environmental engineering research question, but I will attempt to talk about it. But I'd like to start way back, so with respect to the timeline of different disposal options. So we started doing research into this particular area because we were concerned about all of the produced water from the unconventional shale gas development. So because so much water is used in fracturing the wells, there's a lot of flowback water that is brought, and sometimes that's defined as just what comes to the surface in the first 30 days. And then it's just called produced water for the duration of the lifetime of the well after that. And the large development of Marcellus perhaps caught DEP a bit behind as far as how they were going to regulate this, this rapidly developing, technologically sophisticated industry in the state. And there were disposal options for unconventional that quickly were taken off the table. Like unconventional produced waters are not allowed to be spread on roads. So this is probably like 2011. Somebody who knows the real legislative chronology can confirm. And so unconventional produced waters were taken off the table right away, perhaps because of the concern of the larger volume of water coming from all of these wells, and as far as the unconventional wells goes, we now have 10,000, 20,000 of these things. And so like I said, I think it was my first summary of our research. There's very little compositional difference between unconventional produced water and conventional produced water. So, coming immediately with this ban, like thou shalt not spread this stuff on the road, perhaps could have looked over the shoulder with respect to what we've been allowing in the past. And so we were interested in doing some work trying to use these sophisticated isotope geochemistry techniques to see if we could fingerprint the impact of Marcellus shale waste disposal when it was allowed to go to so-called centralized waste treatment plants, or CWTs. These are NPDES permitted facilities that are allowed to take wastewater from the oil and gas industry and not stellar treatment. We did a bunch of permit reviews and reporting reviews and found a lot of things were just monitor and report. In other words, no effluent standards, just here, like here's what we're doing. Now, what they were good at doing, though, was removing radium from these wastewaters, which, as it turns out, is not that operationally difficult because there's, I call it sulfate softening, where you add sulfate to form sulfate minerals that are very insoluble. So barium sulfate is the target phase because there's a lot of barium as well as radium and calcium and other things in these produced waters. But barium sulfate is exceptionally insoluble, and because it's a divalent cation and radium's a divalent cation, you can get radium to substitute into the barite that forms, and you can separate it from the wastewater. So these plants are effective at taking the radioactivity out of the wastewater. Then, most of the high chlorides and all that other stuff is essentially going into the streams. And so we chose some reservoirs in Western Pennsylvania that are used for flood control, and so they're never scoured, and they just collect the sediments, and we analyze these sediments layer by layer to look for the signals of the Marcellus discharge. And indeed we found it. But in doing that, we also did all this regulatory review and permit reviews and figured out, like, well, where is the waste generated that's getting to this particular plant? Like, what's the paper trail involved in that? And there are different categories that have to be designated by the operators. And back before, and I'd have to go back and review this paper, it's probably in the supplemental information, but it's still quite interesting, is that it was probably somewhere, prior to the 2000s, that the major category was other. as far as check the box, other. Now, categories, then we started to see discretization with respect to what treatment options they were. So this is the operator saying the produced water from this well is going to these disposal options, and those options are other. Road spreading showed up, and that's the first time we ever heard about it. I had no idea about this practice until we started looking into this other concern. And then, of course, there's volumes that go to centralized waste treatment plants. And then there's volumes that are going to underground injection control wells, primarily out of state and into Ohio, because the geology is more accepting with respect to these pressurized discharge of the wastewater. So we tracked these categories, and road spreading didn't really start showing up until sometime after 2000. And prior to that, and this is remarkable, and I can send you the report, or you can look for it. There was a report done for Senator Peterson it was done in 1993, published in 1997, all about unlined pit disposal. And this was, I'm not going to say it was a primary discharge option, but it was an option that DEP flagged and said, hey, this doesn't sound good. And so they did this detailed study, and they put groundwater wells up gradient of the pit and down gradient of the pit. And of course, 7 of the 10 sites came back as showing elevated chloride, which is your indicator, cheapest one to measure as far as a down gradient plume from these pits. And of the 3 out of 10, I'm just assuming the wells weren't quite down gradient, because we use chloride as a tracer sometimes in hydrologic studies, so we would expect it to be moving through. And it could be that road spreading then just became like the next option. Like, hey, we can't do it into these pits anymore. And again, if you look at this bar chart that we put together, which are the categories as a function of disposal year, sadly, other dominates most of the past stuff. And then you start seeing these others and this little bit of road spreading. And that really intrigued me. And then as we dug more into it from the regs, like, how is this allowable? And this gets finally to answering your question, is that there are, it was deemed an acceptable disposal alternative until the 2018 moratorium. But, and I'm not sure, I don't think this is within the purview of the Oil and Gas Bureau. It's probably like the hazardous waste group or something like that has the ability to review things about beneficial use and co-product designations and things like that. So part of the challenge, or part of the problem with the road spreading side of things, is you have this overlap of state agencies that may limit who wants to take responsibility and who wants to take charge of the situation, right? You have DEP that should be looking at protecting environmental resources. You have the Oil and Gas Bureau within DEP that's looking specifically at that industry. You have the waste product or waste division within DEP that's making some decisions with respect to these co-product designations. And then, of course, you have DOT that might have its own approval process for things that could be used for road maintenance, for example. And so that I'm not even sure I answered your question directly, but that's the kind of background. That's the at least the sort of regulatory history that we've observed. And so supposedly right now there's a moratorium on spreading conventional oil and gas produced water on roads in Pennsylvania. But I think, as other testifiers will document, it's still going on.
Thank you.
I wanted to just circle back on a piece that you highlighted, and it's in your written testimony, Dr. Virgo. So I'm going to read the sentence that I'm going to emphasize so that you know exactly what you mentioned it in your remarks, but you talked about how regardless of the mechanism of drilling, meaning unconventional and conventional. And this is something that I feel like is still a daily learning curve in terms of how and when those terms are used. Even talking to residents, like, well, I think that well up on the hill is conventional, and then and there's a lot of flip-flopping of what I would call the criteria that make a well in one of these two categories. So my understanding of it is simply just the direction. So straight down is conventional. If you're going laterally, it's unconventional. But regardless, as you mentioned, there still requires some level of substance to crack through rock. And you mentioned how no matter if it's unconventional or conventional produced water, that the results of it in terms of what toxic components are contained are relatively similar. So I just want to make sure that because I would agree just based on if you're going down into the ground, radium is naturally occurring. And so you're bringing it back up right after you fracture the rock and the flow back comes back to the surface. So you have in your written testimony, the median radium activity was 1,230 picocuries per liter in flowback, as compared to the drinking water standard of 5 picocuries per liter. And so I guess my question is, when this is spread on a road, whether it's conventional, because we obviously witnessed unconventional road spreading, Senator Comita and I, that was an unconventional well pad last fall. That was not a conventional. That I am not aware of groundwater monitoring wells by any state agency or federal for that matter, that specifically look at the constituents found in produced water. So when I think of it dumped on a dirt road, as you described, the runoff, like if anybody knows science, soil's connected to the water table, all these things are interconnected. So can you kind of elaborate on maybe the lack of monitoring of this, like over time? Like I would love to look at the soil of one of these road spreading townships and look at the radium compared levels to another township.
Well, to go back to to your description of conventional, unconventional, that's how I see it. Directional drilling is what differentiates an unconventional well from a conventional well. Conventional wells can still be hydraulically fractured to increase productivity. Hydraulic fracturing isn't separate to the conventionality, if you will. That's simply the employment of these sophisticated directional drilling technologies that allow you then to go laterally into the target formation. The target formations in Pennsylvania for unconventional happen to be so-called tight gas formations. Marcellus Shale formation, Utica Shale formation. These are geologic units that contain a lot of methane, but they have to be fractured apart to let that methane flow into the well, right? And then as far as the monitoring, there was, people will refer to it as the T-norm study, where Pennsylvania DEP went out and they used some sophisticated kind of, let's say, Geiger counter, for lack of a more precise description of it, that was attached to, I believe, the back bar of a truck, and it tried to collect radioactivity measurements from roads in northwestern Pennsylvania, in townships where they knew absolutely that some spreading occurred, and then where they assumed spreading had not occurred. And the results were inconclusive because everything came back at, sort of low background. Now, if you dig into that study, there's some aerial images where they ran their truck inside the fence of some of these treatment plants, and you can definitely see some stuff going on with respect to elevated radioactivity. So, human health, I'd be most concerned about the truck drivers and the people that are actually spreading this stuff. not to diminish our testifiers today that have, you know, sensitivities to chemicals and it's happening right in front of their house. Those people don't deserve this to happen either. But the people that might be handling this stuff every day, that's a real concern. As far as, so that said, like, well, depending on how you view that study, go, there's no problem with radium. Like there, it's not there. So we did this very controlled laboratory experiment where we basically built a road 3 feet wide, 9 feet long, 9 feet because that's basically the crown of the road to the ditch with a so-called 18-foot carriageway as far as the terms in this dirt and gravel road world. So we're basically going from the crown to the ditch, 3 feet wide, 9 feet long, pack it with aggregate from Northwest Pennsylvania to the appropriate compaction ratio, spread these different dust suppressants on it, rain on it, and collect all of this runoff chemistry. And lo and behold, all the radium washes off the road. So does that mean the problem's gone away? Not at all. I mean, what it means is that it's in the ditch. It's on its way to the stream. It's potentially being going down into groundwater.
Yeah.
We did do some, this experiment, this large scale experiment was far too complicated and manpower intensive to do multiple applications. Like, okay, let's reapply it and reapply it and reapply it. We did that on these tiny disc experiments where it's all much smaller scale and we did multiple reapplications. And we did find that if you do it again and again, you do start to see, and it's near the detection limit as far as the solids of the road aggregate go, you do start to see radium plateauing at some low level in the road material, which then opens up this whole other exposure pathway, which is radium on dust that's getting lofted from the road and you're breathing it in, it's landing on your porch, it's on your shoes, that sort of thing. And so I'm not sure that answers your question, but
Yeah, I guess I wanted to just hear your feedback because I've read that study and I credit now County Executive Sarah Morado for Allegheny County, but she was a state representative then, and she actually read that T-norm study multiple times and was so perplexed by it because the executive summary pretty much was what you said. It was dismissive, like nothing to see here and conclusive. But then when you looked at the data breakdown, it was quite damning. And then I believe the Public Herald investigative journalism effort to find the specific data by facility. And when I read that, I was really, I mean, like, I think Sarah thought, can you validate what I'm reading? Because I feel like what the executive summary doesn't match what the, all the data says when you look at all the individual facilities. And she was 100% correct. And you are spot on. And I think it's really important for the public's awareness to know that the humans, the workers that are interacting with this waste, whether it be hauling it to a landfill, whether it be spreading it on a road, whatever mechanism of disposal, they are not told this is not, this level of radium is like a nuke plant. I mean, it is, but it's exempt from these regulations that a nuclear power plant and its water would have, right? And so the worker protection piece is absolutely absent. And when it comes to the oil and gas industry and these toxic, hazardous, cancer-causing interactions they have literally on the daily, and then bring home to their family, on their boots and the dirt, all the things. No one is telling them, hey, by the way, this might be a great quote unquote paying job. But you're literally handling, thousands of picocuries of radium on the daily with no idea. Like it's like there's no consent there. It's not like you're accepting of risk, even if that were acceptable. And I think it's just really important for people to note that these exemptions in the law allow for this industry, this only industry. This is the only medical radioactive waste is disposed of in a specific way that is not beneficial use. And I don't even know that it's accurate to continue to call it that, because I'm not sure of any benefit. Other than saving the company money that is extracting the gas, right, and making a profit of it. That's the benefit for them, is they don't have to pay as much to dispose of their waste. And I think that we all assume, well, this is de-icer, this is helping with dust, and it's not. And I think Carolyn or Senator Committee's question of like, what is the remedy, is that banning it certainly hasn't worked because it's still happening. So is it increased boots on the ground, oversight, testing? You know, there's a probably faceted solution that's necessary, but it's just very, like you said, people that are back in Yardley or even in our Senate districts, when you tell them this, they're like, wait, what happens? We're
Right.
like, yeah, that's happening. Like, this happened on the daily.
Well, you know, to back up to the co-product or beneficial reuse option, you know, someone might come along and say, well, hey, okay, so it doesn't work as a dust suppressant. How about we use it for de-icing? And what I would say is, and we said this in our, you know, first paper on this stuff, if you were to do that, it would be wise to treat those waters to get the radium down to at least the industrial discharge limit, which is 60 picocuries per liter. And to make sure that you got rid of the petroleum hydrocarbons, because it's the petroleum hydrocarbons that triggered the human receptor gene toxicity response. And there is also on the table, EPA federal one, there's a operationally defined way to measure hydrocarbons in water, and one of them is called the diesel range organics, or DRO. So it's a certain standard method. And the standard is 10 milligrams per liter. So like you could potentially say, okay, you have to demonstrate that these fluids have been treated to these industrial waste discharge standards, which could conceptually be going into a river at an industrial wastewater treatment plant. So you can, you know, from a policy standpoint, it doesn't seem like you can object to setting anything lower. And that it only be used on, in this case, paved roads in the winter time, right? Like, so that you can't put a sodium-rich brine on a gravel road unless you want to destroy your road. Like, it's just, it's, you know, I'm not sure if this is a good analogy, but like, let's say your house is the gravel road, and someone comes up to you and says, hey, I'll paint your house for free. And you say, well, my house could use a coat of paint. Fine. And then you find out that the paint peels really quickly and it looks terrible. And so the person comes back and says, I'll paint it again. I'll keep painting your house. And you're like, okay, fine. Keep painting my house. And then you start to realize, like, the siding's deteriorating. Like, there's a hole in the clapboard now, you know, like, and there's all of this paint chips around the base of my house. And they're not all there. Some of them have been worked into the soil. Some of them have been rained away and blown off. But I noticed that my grass looks a little yellow around there. And I don't have as many birds coming to my feeder, you know, and it's kind of like, and so the analogy here is that the townships are the homeowner, and they don't mean to do, they think they're getting
A deal.
they think they're getting a deal,
Yep.
but they're getting, you know, that deteriorated siding of the home instead, and these other environmental impacts as well.
That's a great analogy.
It is a very, yes, a very
I
good
mean,
analogy.
it very, very much is. Julie?
May I?
Oh,
Yes.
yes, of course.
So, Dr. Burgos, it sounds as though you have done extensive research on this topic. Do you believe that there is any additional research that is needed to fill any gaps in information, answer any questions about why we should ban the spreading of brine from conventional and unconventional, you just said there's no difference. So why should there be a difference in policy or regulation? Is there any additional research needed in order to close the loop on saying, okay, we need to ban this entirely?
I would say no.
That's what I thought.
Again, if someone's gonna push for it, you'd at least have to, it'd have to be treated. No, there's no more research that needs to be done. But I want to raise one point that I didn't in my summary, and that is in this latest study, this 2024 study where we looked at, we built the road and we did all of this other stuff. We actually wanted to benchmark because we had to demonstrate with respect to the criteria of how it performed compared to the product it was trying to replace. And some of these calcium chloride brines that we used also had elevated radium. So the radium is a divalent cation, Ra2+. Calcium is a divalent cation, Ca2+. And so the charge of the species often they travel together, if you will. What I would, and this isn't research, this might be a policy recommendation, and I don't know who it is, because I don't know who it's to. Is it to PennDOT or is it to DEP? Because I don't know who approves a product to be used on roads in the state of Pennsylvania.
So
But
I think Dr. Burgos, because we actually were planning this, not to interrupt you, but we thought, well, let's invite PennDOT. And I was like, well, no, they have nothing to do with this because they don't use this on state roads. And I think this is where Pennsylvania gets wonky, is there's state roads and there's municipal roads.
Yep.
And whose road is who, right? And so these municipal roads that the municipalities require to obtain the maintenance for, whether they're paved or not, are the ones in question, because actually the T-norm study you mentioned, there is a facility in there, Eureka Resources in Williamsport, that was trying to get their salts as part of a brine for PennDOT. They had them in pool salts for a while, which is terrifying. But so we reached out to PennDOT and I'm like, did you ever approve this? Like, what happened with this? Because it's mentioned in this PowerPoint of how wonderful this stuff is. And they said that after one meeting, they could not prove they could meet the standard for their road, what they put on roads. And they sent it to me. It's like a 900 some page document of all the things you have to meet. And so Eureka backed off of it. But again, PennDOT, was what they told me, they use their own concoction of road brine that is not from oil and gas waste. So I think this is obviously happening in these local municipalities.
Right.
And so who has the jurisdiction then?
Right. So I think I'm done at 11:50, or I'm not sure, but I know there's other panelists. I certainly want to hear from them.
Sure.
My point is, to be fair to the oil and gas industry, we should probably request radium measurements on these other products, and that those things should be less than 60 picocuries per liter, which is the industrial waste standard. Radium can be removed from a calcium chloride brine in that same sulfate softening process, so that whoever is selling that product could add a processing step to remove the radium to make sure it's not in there. And then we'd all feel a lot more comfortable with respect to the calcium chloride or magnesium chloride. So calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, sodium chloride, they're all going to increase salinization of fresh waters. It just happens. But as I said in my written testimony, I'm willing to trade off episodic salinization in the wintertime so I don't smash my car into a tree. I'm getting some benefit from the use of that particular chloride-based product. But if a chloride-based oil and gas produced water doesn't suppress the dust, it's all risk and no reward.
Wow. That's
100% agree.
great inclusion.
Good to move on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And please stick around, Dr. Burgos, if you like, you want to chime in with the next panel, you know, of questions and things like that. Your perspective is obviously very valued, so we appreciate your time and your participation today.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to move on to panel number 2, where we have some advocates and some impacted individuals who are going to give us some testimony. First, we are honored to have Dave Hess, who is the former secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and also writes the most informative platform that is available in this Commonwealth regarding all things Pennsylvania environmental
Environmental News
of
Digest.
environmental
Read
news
it every day.
digest, and certainly keeps me informed as senators. We're not alerted on all things happening, so it's great to have someone keeping track of that. So thank you, Dave, for being with us, and the floor is all yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those kind words and that great introduction. I appreciate that. I want to thank you and members of the Senate Democratic Policy Committee for having the opportunity to provide comments on this critical issue of indiscriminate and unnecessary disposal of conventional oil and gas wastewater on Pennsylvania's public roads. I have one recommendation to offer at this hearing. It is clear an immediate and total ban on road dumping conventional oil and gas wastewater is the only effective option for preventing millions of gallons of wastewater from polluting our environment. First, let's be clear. We're talking about a waste. It's waste that's generated from the time a conventional oil and gas well is drilled through its entire life, which can be decades. The only way to stop that waste from being produced is to plug the well. If it wasn't for oil and gas drilling, this material would be trapped far below ground. As we now know from studies by Penn State and others, testing shows conventional wastewater includes more than 31 chemicals as well as radioactive radium. It can also include fracking chemicals added by companies during the drilling process. And as was mentioned, conventional drillers now routinely frack, just like shale gas companies. Penn State found the amounts of at least 25 of the chemicals they tested for exceeded environmental and health standards, and radioactive radium exceeded industrial waste discharge standards. Penn State also found from 2008 to 2014, spreading oil and gas wastewater on roads released over 4 times more radium to the environment than oil and gas wastewater treatment facilities, and 200 times more radium than spill events. This waste also has to be stored in tanks and transported in trucks with warnings that include flammability hazard because it can catch fire or explode. DEP considers municipalities where conventional oil and gas well owners road dump their waste as waste facilities. So far, 84 townships have this designation in DEP's waste disposal database. And if you want to check, there's a list. The experts on dirt and gravel road maintenance and construction, the Penn State Center for Dirt and Gravel Road Studies, calls the road dumping of conventional wastewater an environmentally unsound practice that can cause water pollution and even damage roads. The Department of Conservation and Natural Resources bans road dumping oil and gas wastewater for any purpose on its over 6,500 miles of state forest roads. DCNR is the largest owner of dirt and gravel roads in the Commonwealth. Penn State's Dr. William Burgos says Pennsylvania should ban road spreading of oil and gas wastewater. There is no public benefit to road spreading oil and gas wastewater. It is all risk, no reward. The only beneficiaries are the oil and gas operators who choose this disposal option. How much of this conventional wastewater is there? We don't know. In March, DEP reported 86% of conventional oil and gas well owners did not comply with waste disposal reporting for 33,505 wells in 2023. DEP data shows over 8 million gallons of conventional wastewater was road dumped in 2017, but that's only what well owners reported. That same DEP data showed from 1991 to 2017, over 240 million gallons of conventional wastewater was road dumped. This is a huge issue, and conventional well owners continue to dump. There is no system in place to track the waste from where it's generated to where it's disposed, recycled, or treated. Even for the amounts that have been reported by well owners, DEP does not have the staff to do audits of what they report to see if those numbers are accurate. In my view, all the numbers are suspect and low. There have been attempts to regulate road dumping of conventional wastewater before to reduce its environmental and health impacts. Starting in 1996, during the Ridge administration, we looked at road dumping and the environmental impacts of this disposal method. The result was a set of guidelines in 1998 that limited how much could be dumped on roads and where, so it wouldn't run off and pollute. The industry failed to comply with those limits on how they dumped or required reporting. They just kept dumping. Well owners turned to DEP's residual waste program and the beneficial use process to get their waste approved for road dumping. But DEP said the industry didn't meet those requirements either. The dumping continues as we sit here. Siri Lawson did not have oil and gas wastewater dumped on her road in Farmington Township, Warren County, for more than 6 years after the Environmental Hearing Board case settlement. On April 4th, less than 2 weeks ago, conventional well owners dumped wastewater on the road in front of her house. The fact conventional well owners continue to road dump hasn't gone unnoticed. According to a consultant for the oil and gas well owners, the Office of Attorney General has been investigating the illegal disposal of conventional wastewater by road dumping under DEP's regulations. No charges have been announced yet. Non-compliance with regulations and the law is not an isolated event by conventional well owners. In December 2022, DEP issued the first ever assessment of compliance by conventional well owners that found non-compliance is an acceptable norm in the conventional oil and gas industry. Kurt Klapkowski, DEP Deputy Secretary for Oil and Gas Management, told the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee in March, unfortunately, reviewing inspection and compliance data developed since 2017, DEP has identified widespread non-compliance with laws and regulations in the conventional oil and gas industry, particularly regarding improper abandonment of oil and gas wells, but also not reporting hydrocarbon and waste production and conducting mechanical integrity assessments on their wells. When you design environmental programs, you look at the problem you're trying to solve, the science, potential benefits, the ability of the industry to comply, and the enforceability of the rule. In the case of road dumping, conventional wastewater is now illegally road dumped indiscriminately and unnecessarily anywhere the industry wants with no limits. We don't know exactly how much because the industry fails to report. The conventional oil and gas industry has demonstrated over decades that non-compliance is an acceptable norm in the conventional oil and gas industry, according to DEP. Penn State research has shown conventional wastewater has no greater value than water as a dust suppressant and has the potential to cause environmental harm. The science says 25 pollutants in conventional wastewater exceed standards to protect public health and the environment, including radioactive radium. The potential benefits of a ban include preventing millions of gallons of conventional wastewater a year from being illegally dumped, contaminating our environment and threatening our public health. Dirt and gravel road experts now know road dumping damages and destabilizes dirt and gravel roads and imposes additional costs on taxpayers. DEP banned road dumping shale gas drilling wastewater in 2016 because it presents a threat to the environment and health. And conventional wastewater is very similar, as we've heard, and presents the same threats, according to Penn State research. A total ban on road dumping wastewater would be a tool DEP could enforce. These facts argue for a bright line, so conventional operators, DEP, and citizens can tell right from wrong. It is clear an immediate and total ban on road dumping conventional oil and gas wastewater is the only effective option for preventing millions of gallons of waste from polluting our environment. I'd be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, Dave. Carolyn and our center committee and I are both sitting here writing down our questions and taking notes as you're speaking. So we will go on to our next panel, testifier for this panel, and then we'll go to Q&A. And I know you're going to also read a statement from one of the residents. So next we have Karen Faraden. We're honored to have her here today to discuss, I'll call it a journey, and her discoveries of this road spreading debacle, and just want to say commend her on her persistence and trying to get answers on this. So Karen Faraden is the co-founder of Better Path Coalition. Again, someone else who is really instrumental in Pennsylvania in terms of getting public awareness increased around these important toxic environmental issues. So Karen, thank you for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, Chairman Muth, Senator Comita, and committee members. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak about road spreading of conventional drilling waste in Pennsylvania. My name is Karen Faraden, and I am the co-founder of the Better Path Coalition. I have been researching and writing about road spreading since 2021. In the 6 years since DEP declared a moratorium on road spreading, as David reported, 3.5 million gallons of conventional drilling waste has been dumped on unpaved roads. And so it's up from the 2 million that we had counted in 2020. Reported, though, is the operative term, because as we learned in 2022, more than half of conventional drillers fail to file production and waste reports. And in that compliance report ordered by Governor Tom Wolf that DEP found from 2017 to 2021 that an average of 56.6% of drillers failed to file reports. But a closer look at each year's figures shows that noncompliance trended upward from 53.7% in 2017 to 61.8% in 2021. In March, Kurt Klepkowski told the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee that 86% of conventional drillers failed to file annual production and waste reports for 2023. That figure will likely go down a little because the DEP also found in 2022 that 16.3% of drillers filed reports after the deadline, sometimes years after the deadline, as I found. Now, I had been looking at waste reports for a couple of years by the time the DEP report came out, but I was already concerned about how little information the waste reports provide. Conventional drillers only file reports annually by February 15th of the following year, so even the entries that are filed on time are dated. Glaring data gaps in the system prevent the user from getting critical details like when and where the waste was disposed. Knowing when waste was disposed is an issue across all disposal methods. Knowing where it was disposed is a problem more specific to road spreading because, as David pointed out, entire municipalities are considered to be road spreading waste facilities. DEP's 2022 report refers to a culture of noncompliance within the conventional drilling industry, but the agency's own culture of see no evil enabling behavior toward drillers contributes to a system that is broken in almost every way possible. An unnamed Pennsylvania agency administrator in a 2017 report Colorado's Department of Health commissioned when it sought guidance for state policymakers on road spreading said it was grandfathered in, that DEP has not seen anything yet that gives them significant pause impact-wise, and that DEP finds it quite difficult to have a rational conversation with the public on seismic activity and radiation specifically. Asked about regulatory and legal realities, the administrator responded that DEP believes the compliance is going well overall. That's the year it was 53.7% noncompliance. In 2021, Klapkowski told CDAC, and this is a long quote, "We have to be able to defend our decisions with data." And that was the attempt. With working with Penn State, that's what we were attempting to do, was develop the data to be able to have a program that we could go to Environmental Hearing Board and the Commonwealth Court and Supreme Court under the Constitution and under the statutes we administer that would be defensible. And it continues, "I don't think we would have any objection to working with CDAC and the legislature to try to figure out a way to develop that data. I think we're hopeful that the study we funded and expect to have finished will provide data that would allow us to have a program that we can defend in court." As recently as last year, Klapkowski said, "The challenge the conventional oil and gas industry faces is finding a way to get produced water designated for beneficial reuse." Klapkowski acknowledged that outcome may be unlikely. Maybe unlikely? What he's referring to is the industry's attempt to sidestep the moratorium by using a program under the Bureau of Waste Management's residual waste program called the co-product program. Now look, drilling waste is a hazardous waste that has never been classified or regulated as such. Drillers will never be able to make the case that their toxic radioactive waste qualifies for the co-product program. It's like trying to force a hazardous peg into a residual hole. The co-product program allows owners of a waste product to use it in place of a commercial product as long as it works as well and does no more harm to the environment or health than the commercial product does. Section 287.8 of the Pennsylvania Code, entitled Co-Product Determinations, lays out what must be considered in making a determination. However, the program is so loosely structured that waste owners who believe that their products pass muster can start using it without notifying the DEP. They are only required to keep their determination report on file to give to prospective clients and to the DEP should the agency request it. In 2021, the Bureau started requesting co-product determination reports from drillers who had reported road spreading in 2020, so I filed the right to know request to receive whatever they received. What drillers submitted bore no resemblance to what a determination report should look like. They sent extraneous information, a copy of 287.8, form letter testimonials from municipalities that like road spreading, random lab reports that did not meet the requirements of 287.8. None of them appeared to be trying to do a proper determination, and to date, none has. That's what should be of raise concerns about an action the DEP took in 2019 when it added a non-existent product type, brine co-product, to its waste reports. Until or unless a driller's waste qualifies as a product, there is no such thing. I learned in a mediation with DEP earlier this year that the agency recalls that the request for the product type came as a verbal request from Penny Duckett of Penfield Energy. I had also asked for documents that showed how DEP decided to act on her request. No documents exist. Without documentation, we do not know if the Oil and Gas Office contacted the Bureau to ask if drillers were using the co-product program appropriately. What we do know is that the Office of Oil and Gas added the product type 2 years before the Bureau began requesting drillers' reports. The Office of Oil and Gas Management was willing to corrupt the state's official record of oil and gas waste handling to fulfill the request of a drilling company that was violating the division's own moratorium. Even after the DEP added the product type, Penfield Energy failed to file reports in 2019 and 2020 and told prospective clients in a 2019 letter, quote, "Penfield has obtained a co-product status instead of waste with our brine. What this means is that you don't have to report spreading and that it can be spread year-round. I know this is hard to believe because DEP doesn't make anything easy, but it's true," end quote. Road spreading was a heavily used method of disposal before the moratorium went into effect. Nearly 29.4 million gallons of waste was road spread in the 3 years before the moratorium, roughly 92% more than was reported in the 3 years after the moratorium. So where did all that waste go? Nobody knows. but there is no question that some of it went where it always went, on our roads. We need a permanent ban on all road spreading and serious consequences for any driller who ignores it. Thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Karen. We were going to have a resident testify, but they were unable to attend, so Dave Hess is going to read the statement from Siri Lawson, a Warren County resident. He did mention her in his remarks earlier, so Dave, if you would kindly read that statement, and then we'll go on to Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. This is testimony from Siri Lawson from Farmington Township, Warren County. I would encourage you to read her entire written testimony, which the committee will post. Thank you for allowing my voice to be heard at this hearing. My heartfelt thanks to everyone who has shown the interest, the will, and perseverance in stopping the environmentally catastrophic oil and gas industrial waste disposal practice known as brine road spreading. Oil and gas wastewater is an enormous liability for fossil fuel industry. Time and again, the industry has proven the less regulators or the public know about this toxic byproduct of fossil fuel production, the better off the industry is. Forbidden in 2011 from easy disposal of wastes into waterways, and with few other convenient disposal choices, all eyes turned to dirt roads. The number of vac trucks disgorging loads of oil and gas wastewater on rural dirt roads literally skyrocketed. Siri Lawson explains, oil and gas wastewater chemically and physically destabilizes dirt roads. Brined roads become discolored, lose their integrity and solid riding surfaces, and once brined, produce exponentially more dust than a road that is not brined. Rural townships maintain their dirt roads in a particular fashion. Road and ditch dirt is graded to the center of the road, then several passes are made with a York rake to smooth out the loose dirt. Left behind in spots, there may be as much as 6 inches of loose dirt ready to be disturbed by the lightest breeze. When this mechanical destabilization is combined with the chemical destabilization caused by massive and repetitive wastewater dumping, the perfect platform for continued road dumping occurs. A, residents plead for dust control. B, townships state they cannot afford to pave these roads. C, the fossil fuel industry steps up and say they have both the answer and the solution, more brine. We discovered there has been so much wastewater dumping in our township, the DEP referred to Farmington Township as a waste facility. That was shocking. As the brine dumping escalated astronomically in our township, we began hearing from fellow residents. They were reporting 3 to 4 brine vac trucks dumping on their roads per day, multiple times per week, month after month, year after year, spring, summer, fall, and they wanted it stopped. Importantly, residents agreed oil and gas wastewater did not suppress dust or stabilize roads. Siri Lawson said there were reports of children experiencing anaphylactic-like respiratory reactions in connection to fresh brine exposure. There were complaints about the smell of brine, how fresh brine could make you dizzy and nauseous if you had to cross your road to the mailbox. People complained about the brine mud generated on a clear, dry day after a fresh spread. If the brine mud was allowed to dry on vehicles, it would have to be chipped off. Amish recounted not only did horses' legs and feet get coated, but often it was the young Amish daughter who was told to clean the dried brine mud coated buggy. Residents told us that in rainy spells, even in summer, they would often have to use all-wheel or four-wheel drive to navigate Farmington's brine roads. There were reports of brand new vehicles significantly rusting in their first year and catastrophic rust-induced failures of older ones. We got reports of farm ponds dead and no longer able to sustain aquatic life. Brine-coated dust is insidious. It would choke people outdoors, and it coated houses, gardens, lawns, crops, cars, animals, and people. Brine-laden dust particles also covered the interiors of buildings, surfaces, food, furniture, pets, clothes. I have startling pictures, Siri said. At the height of the road spreading years, there were reports of springs and wells being affected, people having to deal with orange-brown water. And with the brine came a distinctive bright green algae found in nooks and crannies, sidings, and roofs. So invasive, those that had pools reported they could no longer use them because of the green slime. Siri Lawson said, "We tried to work through all the standard channels to stop road spreading. We and our fellow residents were dissed and threatened or ignored every step of the way. Twice charges were filed against us by one of the vac truck drivers for taking pictures. Once against a neighbor for stopping to watch him spread. The repeated and unrelenting wastewater dumping caused me and my husband to experience life-threatening injuries, heart, lung, sinus, ear damage, massive infections, metabolic damage. It badly damaged many of our horses and dogs. They suffered the same injuries. All the environmental advocacy in the world was not having an impact on either DEP, our township, or those using Farmington's dirt roads to dump brine. We had to turn to the courts, and Fair Shake Legal Services was the only firm brave enough to take our case. Fair Shake gave us the choice of a personal injury action or different action, which would benefit our dirt road neighbors and all those that lived on dirt roads in Pennsylvania. There was no choice. We would try to help everyone. The outcome of the 2017-18 Environmental Hearing Board lawsuit is hard to bear. Its immediate success was rapidly clouded by its shortcomings. Outsiders dubbed our victory merely as a moratorium on road spreading, and as it turns out, not even that. Some operators did not wait even a month to resume spreading and manipulating the law. Siri Lawson said, by 2021, the brine dumping business had nearly returned to normal. Once again, dirt roads were getting hammered. Wastewater was being spread on paved roads. When the good people of Pennsylvania speak of drilling wastes, drilling cuttings, and wastewaters that have made our landfills radioactive and irradiated our waterways, this is what's being dumped on Pennsylvania's roadways. Only some of what is dumped on the roads stays on the roads. Some wastewater washes into the waterways, some sinks into ditch sediments. While the bulk of the VOCs, volatile organic compounds, evaporate, the majority of the brine attaches to tiny dust particles as it dries and it blows into surrounding houses, barns, and woods. Residents are literally inhaling oil and gas wastewater 24 hours per day. Siri Lawson concludes by saying, Pennsylvania needs to pass a total and complete ban on road spreading of oil and gas wastes. The oil and gas industry is continuing to use the public's paved and dirt roads to dispose of their wastewater. Over the past month, in dry weather and well above freezing, I have photographed numerous roads coated with fresh, distinctive wellhead wastewater. The government, environmentalists, science, and the oil and gas industry rapidly need to become leaders in solving the oil and gas wastewater problem. The solution will require public involvement also. That's the end of her testimony.
Thank you very much, Dave, for reading that on behalf of Siri, and I'll start with Senator Cometta for the Q&A.
Thank you, Senator Muth. Thank you, former Secretary, DEP Secretary Dave Hess. This is the continuation of a long, years-long conversation that you and I have been having about brining. when it came to my attention, wanting to understand it. Thanks to you, thanks to Karen Ferridan, and thank you for reading Siri Lawson's letter, which really hits home on the personal tragic impacts of this brining. So with your experience as a DEP secretary, and with knowing DEP has banned the dumping of brine for non-conventional wells, what has prevented DEP from enacting a total ban on conventional dumping?
Senator, I think you'd have to ask them that, because I think it was clear from the testimony that Dr. Burgos gave to your committee and the work that he and his researchers have done over the years, that it is very clear that conventional wastewater, first, is not much, if any, different than shale gas wastewater, number one. And if they banned shale gas, why can't they ban conventional? I think that's number one. I think this is as a result of Penn State's work, this is probably one of the most studied wastes we have.
Yeah.
And all the studies come out the same way. It is bad news for the environment. It is bad news for public health. Again, you'd have to ask them why they are not acting on this information, because I think it's very clear. And in fact, DEP itself, in funding some of this research work, has built the record itself on why this is harmful. But you would really have to ask them why they don't do it, and hold these conventional operators accountable for what they're doing.
So,
May I add something? We
Yes.
did invite the department. I
Yes,
did not say this at the
yes, right.
beginning. We did invite the department, as well as the Kurt that you quoted earlier, Dave, the head of the Oil and Gas Bureau. And initially they had responded affirmatively to participate today, and then unfortunately, I believe it was Thursday last week, we received notice that they no longer could participate due to a calendar conflict. So I just wanted to state that, so that we weren't putting Dave on the spot to respond for an agency that he doesn't necessarily work for anymore. But I just wanted to say they were invited to participate, but ultimately it's declined. And they did submit some
submitted written testimony. So, that's,
there's that
That's
to look at
helpful,
online.
yes.
All of the written is uploaded at senatormuth.com/policy, as you said, Dave, including Siri. So everyone can look at that written testimony.
So Dave, pardon me. I believe it was you that said that DEP could enforce a total ban. And in learning about this issue and challenge and needs and so on, one of the things that I have been made aware of is that the reporting, as we know, what do we have, 86% of industry drillers fail to report. I think that Karen Ferridan shared that detail. So they're failing to report. There's a moratorium, but there's ways to get around it. So, but I think that you said, Dave, that a total ban is something DEP could enforce. Could you talk about, any thoughts on what that reporting mechanism would look like? Is this like a huge lift? Is it doable? Does DEP have the staffing, the capacity, if there were a total ban, to actually enforce it? And what would that look like?
Well, I think first, I mean, it's as many people have said, in the oil and gas program, DEP doesn't in fact have enough people to do its job. I think everybody recognizes that. But given that base, okay, I think the reason I think it's going to be much easier to enforce a total ban is simply because it's a bright line.
Right.
You know, if someone's out there on the road dumping this stuff, you don't have to go and do any research whether it's according to the residual waste regulations or not, or any of that stuff. You have the evidence right in front of you. And, you know, those are the kinds of things that the Office of Attorney General is trying to document as well as part of their investigation, as I understood it from the conventional oil and gas industry consultant. So it is easier to enforce because it's black and white. And in terms of designing a way of enforcing this requirement, DEP has been, as it was relayed to me, made aware of lists of companies that haul this kind of waste and frequently dump this kind of waste. And they were given names, in other words. You know, I will compare this to what we did during our time, and actually during the Casey administration, in trying to catch trash trucks that were overweight and leaking and not complying with the requirements. What you have to do is you have to get out there in the field, and you have to do it cooperatively with law enforcement so that you can catch these folks. If you, I think if you take a few high profile actions and do the kind of work that's needed. I mean, the advantage of this kind of violation is, you know, the names of the operators, you know where they're coming from. All you got to do is follow them in an unmarked vehicle. That's it. So it seems rather simple, but it's also, you know, staff intensive. I understand that. Okay. But I think one of the objectives that DEP should have is to make some high profile enforcement cases. You know, in looking at, say, the enforcement records for 2023 or even years before that. I mean, one of the things I do is read all the inspection report, not all the inspection reports, but oil and gas inspection reports every week that DEP posts. I've never seen anything related to road dumping or road spreading ever in the last two and a half years, ever. Okay. And to me, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Because you're getting citizens out there that are saying, look, they're dumping this crap in front of my house, you know, overnight, and they're doing it repeatedly. They're dumping it on hard roads because they know they can get away with it. There are trucks, I've been told, coming in from Ohio on Interstate 80 that are dumping it on Interstate 80. Okay.
Wow.
Now, again, if you know all this stuff is happening, you can't just call up these guys who transport this stuff and say, hey, are you road dumping this stuff? Doesn't work that way. You have to have an organized effort to go out and enforce these requirements.
If I may add a few things,
Sure.
clearly the enforcement side is going to be required. The total ban, while there'll be objections to it, is certainly from a policy standpoint actually easier to implement than trying to come up with any other, I don't know, categorization of these materials. But with respect to enforcement, and this is just going back to the chemistry side of things that I have knowledge of, if a truck was, pulled over, if you will, in the midst of spreading, collecting the fluid that is in that truck would be an easy way to determine whether it's an oil and gas brine versus a commercial product, because, and you don't have to do expensive analyses. This is just major elements: sodium, calcium, magnesium, and chloride. That's all you'd need to measure. And you could easily determine whether that's an oil and gas brine as compared to a purified calcium chloride product, which we should welcome on the road, or a magnesium chloride product. So it could be coupled to the early enforcement. I think, with any sort of enforcement activity, it has to be really strong to start, and then it may end up being able to be relaxed because people know that the disincentive is so high that they're not even going to attempt. But again, you could very easily, and you don't need fancy, plasticware is what you typically use for collecting samples to measure these kind of things. And you could identify the source of the water.
But the total ban needs to be in place first. In order,
Correct.
that's number
Yes.
one.
That's number one.
Otherwise.
Absolutely. And then you have to figure out your
co-product, all the, yeah.
Right. And then you have to figure out your enforcement strategy. The only viable co-product application would be winter de-icing on paved roads with a product that has had the radium and hydrocarbons removed. That's the only, environmentally responsible option. There's no dust suppression. There's no using this stuff during the so-called dust season because it's so sodium rich.
Senator, if I could add one thing in terms of, again, practicality. The people that haul this waste are licensed by DEP. There is absolutely no reason why a truck that hauls this stuff needs any sort of spreading bar or mechanism on the truck to spread this stuff on roads or anywhere else, period. So in terms of ease of enforcement, even if you see a truck that's hauling this waste that has a spreading bar on the back of it, there's no reason for that truck to have a spreading bar, none. So even that is an indication. How these trucks are equipped is an indication that they're doing this illegal activity, because there's absolutely no reason why these trucks should be equipped with a spreading bar. DEP already licensed them. They know who they are. Another aspect of enforcement would simply be go around and inspect these trucks to see which ones have spreading bars or could have a spreading bar or mechanism attached to them. I mean, that's another easy, practical way to get at this issue.
And Dave, I guess I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
go
chime
right
in on
ahead.
this because I'm listening to this and I have two things you can comment on, or that I'm thinking about what Senator Comita and I witnessed in Susquehanna County, where literally a street sweeper truck like that you would see in a city came off of a well pad in the middle of God's country, beautiful farmland. Cows literally right next to where we were standing, and on a paved road took unconventional waste and just liquefied the road down and back. And we have a video of this. This is not like, so I think of that, and that's clearly not allowed, allegedly. But to your point, like, what's the enforcement mechanism even of the unconventional? Because clearly there's not. and I guess when I think of a moratorium, like when I think of a moratorium on the death penalty currently in Pennsylvania. And so I'm thinking, if there's a moratorium on the death penalty, then that's not happening. No one is dying from the death penalty the convicted of a crime. So there's a moratorium on road spreading, but the road spreading still happening. So it's like, what is it's difficult to say ban it, and for a moratorium is not even being enforced. And I think to your point is, this is not that hard to track. And I did not know that the trucks that haul waste are registered or licensed with the DEP. I was not aware of that. That's good to know. But again, like, there are residents who have submitted Ring doorbell camera footage of things just being dumped in their front yard in neighborhoods, not even poor Siri Lawson in a more rural area. I mean, literally in Allegheny County, I've been sent one. So I don't understand. I know that the DEP staffing is a long-term problem and funding cuts, et cetera, but even just real-time data reporting, right? Like, technology has advanced where the cost of that could be put on the operator, right? Like, you as the operator could be required, you're geo-sighted at the waste disposal site, right? Like, and the amount that's in your truck is transferred to the landfill or wherever it's supposed to go. And even thinking of the facilities that have T-norm plans where some of the waste is hauled to Utah, which I've seen. How is that? Now I'm like, God, is that even tracked, or is it just a PDF document of here's a plan, but does it happen? So I think it is frustrating knowing that some of this is fixable with technology, but then again, is it just, there's just not enough eyes on it? Like, I mean, I submitted the thing, what we witnessed, to the EPA, and I never heard anything. So, I mean, how do you say we have a constitutional right to clean air and clean water when we're literally, it's a difficult thing for the public to hear because there's nobody fighting for them, and to get as Siri's comments mentioned, to get a lawyer to represent you and fight this battle is even more financially restrictive. It just seems that, is there a way that the DEP can actually in this moment enforce a ban? Or do you think they have the will? Or I don't. I mean, that's just my opinion. I'm concerned as we head into this new phase of energy development in Pennsylvania, that we are on the precipice of just poisoning beyond no return. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on it, but
I wanted to add a comment if I could.
please.
Thank you. I focused a lot of my comments, as you heard, on the culture. And one of the reasons why I did that, because I agree with everything that's been said about the need for a ban and how it could be enforced. But in the short term, right now, today, I think one of the things that impressed me most, actually, in looking into this was the way that the Bureau of Waste Management handled it. And so we're looking at a huge issue of non-compliance that the DEP's oil and gas division just sat on for a long time, even after they saw that drillers had really never stopped, reporting road spreading. Forget the fact that more than half of drillers weren't reporting anything, but for the ones that did, they didn't do anything about it. And so all they did in 2019 was give them a product type to make it easier for them. But the Bureau of Waste Management, when they got onto it in 2021, Kevin Beer, who I want to give great props to for the work that he's done, because I otherwise pretty critical of DEP, but Kevin Beer contacted all of them with a simple letter. He had to go through it, several times to go back and forth with some of these companies, but he wrote to all of them, and he was very direct and concise and clear and consistent, I think is the key word. He just never wavered from his message that you are not meeting the requirements of 287.8, now that we're talking about it as a co-product. And he just went back and forth with them until they stopped. And so when you look at those stats that I was pointing to earlier, there's a significant drop off after the moratorium was declared, but there was another significant drop off after 2021 when Bureau of Waste Management finally stepped in. Now, I'm reluctant to say that the people who stopped reporting it at that point just didn't stop reporting it and kept doing it. But I'd like to think that some of them actually stopped road spreading and continued to report, but reported, how they were going to dispose of their waste in different ways or how they had disposed of it. And I think that was because of the steady hand of Kevin Beer, who really just didn't give them an out. And the fact that the oil and gas, I'm really tired, frankly, as I've been hearing this since, many years ago when I used to be part of a group that met with Scott Perry regularly. He always sat there and said, we don't have the statute, we don't have the resources. Well, you know what? Kevin Beer doesn't have it more than you do, and he managed to get something done. And so, I think that the fact that they sat on this information and did nothing about it is unforgivable and indefensible. And so I don't want to hear about their lack of resources. They have enough resources to send a letter and say, get your reports in, or we're going to start pulling your permits.
If I may follow up, thank you, Karen. That the information that you have with respect to the frustration of a self-reporting system is very valuable. But with respect to the report and the idea of using a different bureau for the enforcement side of things is interesting, right? Because the Bureau of Oil and Gas, even though they did support this one research project that we did, didn't necessarily use the results to try and transform the industrial activity at all. It just seems like we published it on our own kind of thing. So that's it, structurally, that's an interesting idea. But the other side of the reporting, and I'm not sure what sort of incentive there is for reporting on the volume of the petroleum product that the well produces. So I'm not sure if there's a whole other economic geology or an economic development entity within the state that tracks all of the production of, coal, oil, gas. As far as these are things that I would imagine as governor or the different secretaries, that these are the accolades as far as hey, look at how much, we're the Texas of the Northeast, that sort of thing. And so maybe a strict requirement for as honest of reporting as the produced water goes is a requirement with respect to accepting, the commodity report, because hopefully there's, I imagine, from a taxing standpoint, it seems like the state certainly wants accuracy on how much commodity came out of that particular well, how much, capital activity was involved, how much tax, is sort of associated with selling that product, selling that commodity, and that there be some linkage to produced water volume, and then where it went. And the volume part's important because there's a lot of, the Pennsylvania conventional oil patch in the northwestern part of the state has a pretty well-established water to fuel ratio, 8-to-1, 10-to-1, barrel of water per barrel of fuel. And if you're, have sold 1,000 gallons of fuel, then you should have to be able to document where your 8,000 or 10,000 gallons of produced water went, or at least say you made that much. So in other words, that's where you might be able to benchmark or get some honesty in the volume of material by requiring it to be coupled with the product reporting side of things. And if someone's reporting oh, yeah, I sold 1,000 barrels of oil, but I only have 10 gallons of water, it's clearly that it doesn't match up at all close to a historical ratio that you would expect. So I don't know, this is outside of my expertise. I'm not trying to weigh in on policy or implementation of it, but as my dad would always say, you follow the money, what's making the money here? And what's making the money here is selling the oil and selling the gas.
No, and I think you bring up another point that just popped into my head when extraordinary water users, which are these gas extraction companies, right? Many of them have to apply to various river basin commissions to extract the clean waters of our Commonwealth waterways for a nominal next to nothing fee. So they get a monthly permit for, I believe it's 1 million gallons of water per frac. So every company gets a different level they request. You can see those requests, I think in the PA bulletin, as well as in like the Susquehanna River Basin Commission has some on their website. So just with that, I mean, it's a lot of variable math, right? We're picking from these numbers, but to your point, there are production reports on the DEP's green or EFACS or what the portal thing. There's also waste production reports. So that's something I never thought of in terms of, are the production of product reports lapsed? Is there a lag in that reporting versus there's always a lag in the waste production reporting, if at all? So that's something I've never thought to look at, but I do know I've asked the department before why there weren't waste production reports for certain well pads, and they said, well, they give them, up to 3 months or something to turn it in. And again, that seems like quite a delay, but I guess maybe what I would ask whoever wants to answer it, when it comes to conventional and unconventional reporting of waste, is there any difference that you've seen? Because I guess I've mostly focused, I think, on unconventional when I looked up more recently drilled well pads. So I'm curious, is there similar gaps in information? I believe there are, but I want to know what you all have encountered.
Well, in terms of general reporting requirements, conventional well owners have to report once a year. Shale gas companies report waste monthly. Now, they have the opportunity to correct things if they need to, but that's a huge difference because we don't know what the conventional guys do until essentially a year later. The other thing is as Karen mentioned, that the people in DEP who license waste haulers are the waste program, not the oil and gas program. So that would be another avenue to ask the DEP waste program what they are doing to enforce this requirement on waste haulers. So again, that's maybe into the weeds a little bit, but it's an important distinction.
No, I 100% agree, because as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cross section of regulators and departments and divisions. And what I'm sure I know we've encountered, just even being a newer senator, is that there's these silos of information where things just aren't shared. So is it just a situation, like that the waste program, isn't having that communication with the oil and gas? I don't know, but that's a great point, Dave.
Well, generally with the conventional side, the annual reports, the production report and the waste report is one report, just two aspects of the same report. So if they're not reporting waste, they're not reporting production.
Well, actually, I wanted to mention something about that wasn't clear in the 2022 report from the DEP, because one of the reasons why I know about Penfield's record was because when I saw that Kevin Beer had reached out to them, I was kind of surprised because they hadn't reported road spreading in 2020. And so when I looked them up, I saw that indeed they had reported production in those early years of the moratorium, but they had not reported on waste. And so, one easy place to start is to just go through your own records, within the oil and gas division and see how many of them are reporting production and not waste. And right there, you've got a subset of groups to read, companies to reach out to. But it just appears that there's no sort of internal audit, and so while it's a, another strain on an agency that's, underfunded and understaffed. At the same time, it's astonishing to me that in 2020, it took Governor Wolf asking the DEP to do this for them to do this. Why, we're complaining about the industry not reporting. What about the DEP? Why aren't they checking in every year to see how the compliance is and then getting, contacting those groups of, the companies that are not complying? There's just been no effort. They just kind of sit there, and as I pointed out from that one quote from the unnamed administrator who was, participating in a survey for Colorado, that they think there's no problem compliance wise, and they have, it just feels like they're checked out. Like they don't even understand what's going on around them. And so I think, just being able to look at their own records would reveal to them things that I, a novice, a civilian, was able to find very easily in like 2 minutes. And the fact they're not doing this is unacceptable and unexplainable, really.
I mean, I agree. I mean, it's a very good point. I think it just, even as you mentioned, Karen, looking at these things as like, I consider myself a novice. And I often call or text you and others to help me understand what I'm looking at. But that it just, there's things that just don't match up. And a lot of this is just on Excel sheets and things, but just taking the time to look through your own records, like, is this being done? Even if it takes you 3 months to get through a month of records, at least it's still being looked at in a more sufficient manner than the current practice, because it's almost like until someone else identifies the problem, no one else, the department's not. So what is that lag in, or lack of, just reading their own report and information?
Well, it would seem that the frequency of that report should go up more than once per year, right?
Yes,
Sure.
You might get major pushback from requesting it monthly, but I don't know, every 2 months, quarterly. You would at least be alerted to, or have that information available to you sooner than later.
I 100% agree, but I also am like with the unconventional, when I mentioned looking at the spreadsheets for waste production, and it would be like 3 months behind, even though it is required monthly. There seems to be this extra allowance of time for the unconventional operator, even though it's monthly reported, there's a 3-month lag, in that, or a minimum, maybe, I can't say that it being uploaded to the public sphere. So I don't know if the lag is in the data was turned in by the operator and it's the department, putting it into the spreadsheet, or is it just that the operator didn't, give it in the month requirement? So that is a good point. But I certainly think if we can track Amazon packages by the moment, and we can, look at all of these things in real time, even, Google Maps shows us what's on the road. Like, I think that having technology being inserted here as real-time reporting is not an unrealistic ask for these companies that bring in the big bucks, so I at minimum.
The enforcement discussion has focused more on the act of spreading, but maybe there could be some sort of enforcement or incentive. I think we'd have to call it an enforcement action on timeliness of reporting and completeness of reporting.
100%. If you don't turn it in, then your permit's pulled. Like, I think there has to be a 3 strikes, you're out. You can't, these continued chances, to submit things and modify things months later. Like, oh, wait a minute, we actually had an extra 1,000 gallons of waste that you didn't report 5 months ago. Then you're amending a report, but like, how did that get missed? Like, what is the rationale? Just not put it in.
I wanted to mention a couple things about the reporting lag. For one thing, you're right that, even when you look in the unconventional reports, you'll see that there's still a 3-month lag. But as I mentioned from that 2022 report from the DEP, they found that 16.3% on average of the people who did report, the companies that did report, reported after the deadline. And I happen to have calculated for the report I did for Better Path Coalition in 2021 called Moratorium Morass. That was the result of all of my initial research on all of this. I happened to count up how much had been reported by in that span of years by the end of 2022. I guess it was December 2022 when I did that. I did it again earlier this month, and I found that the total is now 4,200 barrels higher than it was when I did it in December of 2022. And so when they're late by years in some cases, not just months or weeks. And so, it's really hard to get any kind of, I mean, now that we know that, most of them don't report anything anyway, that makes it just more absurd. But even when they do, if you're trying to get any sense of what's happening in real time, you just can't. And especially when they're going to be years late in reporting. So you never know what you're looking at when you look at those reports. But I think for me, the fundamental question as an environmental advocate is that, why am I using a waste report in the first place? And it's because I want to find out what happened, where and when, how much was dumped. I want to know this, and I can't. There's no way that I can know this. And so, like I said, my earlier frustrations before I realized the level of noncompliance was that when you look at a waste report, you can't find out where or when it was disposed of. I mean, that's why have a waste report? It just makes no sense. And so I think, in addition to all these things we're talking about, there really needs to be an internal review at DEP of why they do things the way they do things. And the other one I would point to, and again, I really admire a lot of what the Bureau of Waste Management has done in the handling of this, but that co-product program is insane, that people can start using a waste without having to notify the DEP, especially because they know that there are probably, very responsible, waste owners out there who will appropriately use the program to keep things out of landfills, which is the good intention of the program. But they also know that they're dealing with the oil and gas industry that's going to find every way they can around every rule that's ever made. And so why would you have a program sitting there vulnerable to this kind of exploitation? So they really need to start looking at their own internal practices and their own methods and their own procedures and, and how they could make their own lives easier, frankly, if they didn't expose themselves to these kinds of problems because they had a reporting requirement. And if you don't report, you lose your permits, or you don't get to use the co-product program and not tell us. They would make their own lives easier.
And I think it is a good point in the sense that I'm trying to find out, but it's 13 or 18 state, how many states don't allow this versus not allow it, and we are one of the states that allow it. So the majority of the country does not allow it. So I think that speaks to the bigger issue here is why is it still happening here, Ohio, New York, the map that was provided. So I think this is not an unreasonable ask, to not just ban it, but also document it and make sure we're tracking that public health piece, because to your point, we find out, you made me think of Amity and Prosperity, the book about Western Pennsylvania, and how eventually after things were discovered, you could layer, right, where things were dumped illegally, cancer rates starting to high. I mean, this is over a year's span, but why should we all have to wait until data is uncovered and investigations and things to find out we were poisoned? And why should we even be poisoned in the first place when the government is supposed to protect people? So I think that's the bigger, for me, the frustration of what are we doing as a government is not working very clearly. And this is decades of research going back to this 50s and 60s, Cancer Alley, Louisiana. This is the gas and oil operations have a long, decades-long evidence path showing the harm, even to workers. And so, if we want to attract people to live in Pennsylvania and have an economy that is strong, that requires healthy people and a healthy place to live, not just site development and drill baby drill. Go ahead, Senator Committee.
Thank you, Senator. And again, thank you, Karen and Dave and Dr. Burgos. Your last comment, Senator Muth, made me think about the cautionary principle, which if we could only use that in a situation like this, or in all of our environmental situations, we would be much better off. But it certainly seems that, that what we've heard is that, there's a ban on, non-conventional. The conventional wastewater is essentially the same thing. So it would seem logical to have a ban on the conventional, and that it would help environmental health, public health, and remove an ineffective practice that is deteriorating roads in the process, dirt roads. And that a total ban is something that DEP could enforce. So I think that's pretty clear, and I think that we will continue conversations with our friends and colleagues at DEP and see what we can do to move this forward as soon as possible. So thank you, everybody.
And I just want to say thank you as well
Thanks.
to everyone for your expertise, your testimony, your dialogue with us, trying to hash some of this out. Without your insight, you know, we would be lost. So genuine thanks on our end. And thank you to all the staff who helped organize today, as well as you know, those who listened in, and hopefully you'll share this with others who couldn't participate in real time. And I just want to reemphasize that this Pennsylvania is where we all live. It's our home, and we have to continue to defend our home, unfortunately, often from failed efforts by government. And so I can't urge people enough to, like, is this overwhelming? Yes. Is it scary? Yes. The alternative is to pretend it doesn't exist, and that's maybe helpful in a brief moment of sanity, but in the long term, if there's more of us in this fight to demand what we are constitutionally required, which is clean air and clean water and clean soil, not just now, for future generations to come, and that we band together and push for these things, because it's not necessarily anti-industry, anti-this, it's really just protection of humans and our environment and ecosystem that is literally required to exist for us to exist. And so the looting and polluting of Pennsylvania really needs to stop. We need government leaders to look at this data and take it seriously. Government leaders should not be saying that we need more data. We have decades of data. We have very smart people who have put their lives, hearts, and brains into all of this, that have discovered this and know the harms and know also how to prevent them. You know, we have a lot of legislation between the two of us, certainly, to try and change the landscape of how Pennsylvania, you know, treats its residents relative to public and environmental health. And I have bills to close that hazardous waste loophole, 3 bills that would require oil and gas industry to be held to the same standard as every other operating industry in this Commonwealth, and be responsible for their waste. And also, I want to mention, you know, that we have on April 30th coming to the Capitol, a great group of individuals, including a former waste hauler worker, for a press conference regarding this issue, and just general the exposure to risk for workers in the public. And so invite everyone to join in on that. And just want to say thank you to Senator Comita for having truly political courage to talk about these things and take on these issues, because not every legislator does such a thing. So I just want to say a personal thank you to her for caring, and thank you again for all of the testimony and all of your participation. And nevertheless, we will persist in taking on this battle. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.